Here we go with some multiple choice or paper 1 questions on the topic 1.3. So everything related to membrane structure. So let's just get started. In the diagram, which structure is an intrinsic or integral protein? So we can see here, this is a membrane, right? And we can see all of the structures, just like we did in my video, right? We can see the membrane that surrounds the cell. This is a structure. It's got a lot of labels. Now, which of these is the intrinsic or integral protein? It's gonna have to be B. Why is that? Because an integral or intrinsic protein is a protein that is located inside. So it spans the length of the membrane. So it's not like this one that is kind of or it's not like this one that is on the outside of the membrane, like this one and this one. It is inside. It is spanning through the membrane. So we call this an integral protein. And they typically, if we look at my diagram, it's a bit more clear. They are typically involved in transporting things from the outside in or the inside out. So you can see here, it's like a little channel that allows molecules to go in and out. Same with this one here. So it's B. It's going to be B. A is a phospholipid. Specifically, it seems to be pointing at the phosphate head. Like if we look, you can see a phosphate has the head and the tails, right? They're pointing at the phosphate head. Here, they're pointing at the carbohydrate chain. So it would be this green molecule here attached to a protein here, or attached to a phospholipid here. And then C, they seem to be pointing at the cholesterol molecule, which is basically this one here. So this one's real simple. You just need to know the structure of the membrane. And this one's, there's no extra thinking involved. So it's going to be the B. Okay, next one. See, notice how this is actually a different exam, but they use the exact same membrane. Isn't that funny? Like they actually use the exact same membrane. So, or not the exact same, but extremely similar instruction in looks membrane. So if you do enough questions, eventually you're going to get the same question. So what parts of the cell membrane indicated, now what are the parts of the cell membrane indicated in this diagram? So basically similar question, but a different way of answering it. So what is 1, what is 2, what is 3, what is 4? So let's go to 1. We can see here 1, they're pointing at the entire phospholipid. They're basically pointing at the entire phospholipid. So we know it's going to be A or C, because they're pointing at the phospholipid. They're not pointing at the hydrophilic layer. The hydrophilic layer would be the outside layer only, and then the hydrophobic layer would be the inside layer only. But they're pointing at the entire phospholipid. So it's going to be A or C. Now, what is 2? 2 is a carbohydrate. We don't know if they're pointing at the entire thing, because this entire thing, the protein with the carbohydrate, it's called a glycoprotein. So it's unclear right now, just looking at this, if they're pointing at just the carbohydrate or also the protein, in which case it would be a glycoprotein. So let's see. 2, they're saying glycoprotein, carbohydrate, peripheral protein or carbohydrate. So we know that in this case, they are referring to the glycoprotein, because when we look at carbohydrate, that implies that the first option should be B. Should be a hydrophilic layer, which is not true. We know this is a phospholipid. So it's probably going to go leaning towards A, but we can confirm it with 3 and 4. So is 3 an integral protein? Yes, we just answered in this question, right? It's an integral protein. So far it's looking good. It's looking like it's going to be A. We just got to confirm with 4 here. Hydrophobic layer. So that should be the outside layer. The inside layer. This is the inside layer, the hydrophobic. It's the part that doesn't like water. So that is 4. So that's true. So the answer here is A. Okay, now what is the role of cholesterol in animal cells? So we know that cholesterol is a little molecule that has like 4 little hexagon shapes, and they're located in the membrane, and their main function is to control the fluidity of the membrane. What do I mean by that? So the membrane, right, is very bendy. It's not very rigid. It's not like a wall of your house. The wall of your house cannot change in shape, right? It's rock solid. Now, the wall of a cell, so the cell membrane, is very bendy. It's very like flexible. And the thing is, sometimes it can get too flexible. So these phospholipids move around too much. They're too bendy. So these cholesterols will help keep these phospholipids together, preventing them from becoming too flexible. But at the same time, sometimes these phospholipids bind so tightly together and that they become too rigid, that the membrane becomes too rigid, in which case the cholesterol helps to separate them. It's like breaking up. It's like breaking up the fight. It's breaking them up, and in that way, it makes the membrane more fluid. So overall, cholesterol can both reduce fluidity or increase fluidity, depending on the scenario. But overall, it's trying to maintain the appropriate fluidity of the membrane, making it just bendy enough, but not too bendy, not hard enough, and like not too hard. So it's trying to just maintain the fluidity. That's the ultimate rule. You don't have to know that much about how they do it though. So just need to know they're involved in that. So is it A, increases body fat? Nope. Cholesterol doesn't have that role. It'd be another kind of fat that does that, not cholesterol though. B, it controls membrane fluidity. See, that's all they want you to know. They're gonna write a whole bunch of nonsense for A, C, and D just to trick you. But all you need to know is just, if you knew this from the beginning, you don't even have to read A, C, or D. So it is gonna be B, but we can check C. It lines the inner wall of capillaries. No, not cholesterol. Only in diseases. In diseases they do this, and in which case you can get a heart attack, for example. But yeah, not normally. It is a constituent of bile. See, that's not true. But again, you're not taught this at this moment, so you wouldn't know this. So a lot of the time, IB questions will make it seem like the question is really hard, but ultimately the option is really obvious if you study the chapter properly, so you can ignore the other options. But again, yeah, so they're going to try and make it difficult by naming stuff that they don't actually teach you directly. So we know it's going to be B regardless. Animal cells often secrete glycoproteins as extracellular components. What is the role of these glycoproteins? So all they're saying is animal cells, sometimes if you look at their membrane, they secrete or basically place this molecule called a glycoprotein because it's got a carbohydrate chain on a protein, so we call it glycoprotein. And they have three main functions, right? Hormones, let's go with the simple one, adhesion. These carbohydrates, on the glycoproteins, can serve as glue to help stick cells together and help them attach to certain places as they move around. So that's one function, adhesion. Secondly, communication. So this kind of serves as like a little telephone. It can communicate with other cells using this little structure here. And then kind of telling them what's up, what's going, are you healthy, are you unhealthy, are you a bad cell, are you a cancer cell, are you a good cell, kind of just finding out what's going on in its environment by communicating. Yeah, it's kind of like eyes of a cell basically. So hormones binding sites. So ultimately the last function is that these little structures here can bind to little molecules. So we know cells make molecules and send them around, and these molecules can bind to these places of other cells, kind of controlling those cells so it can land there and tell the cell to do something. It's basically like a little note, like a little message. So it serves as the mailbox basically of little messages. So what would the answer be here? A, adhesion. See, that's one role. So we know it's probably going to be A because that's one key reason. But there is three total. So additional energy reserve. No, it's not for that. Proteins are never for energy reserve. It's normally fats and carbohydrates, not proteins though. Membrane fluidity. Nope. Which molecule does that? It's going to be cholesterol, right? Not proteins. Water uptake. Water uptake would be a protein. There's a protein called aquaporin, which helps uptake water, but it's not a glycoprotein's function. So it's going to be A. A is the answer. Okay, here we go with the last one for this video. Which are functions of membrane proteins? So again, we have here the membrane, a bunch of proteins like these integral proteins, peripheral proteins, glycoproteins. So they're asking here, what are functions of membrane proteins? Hormone binding sites. We know that's one. That's one we learned in the video that I taught, right? And then, so that's true so far. And then they say DNA replication. Oh, that's not true. That's not a function of membrane proteins. Other proteins inside the cell may do that, but not the membrane proteins. The membrane proteins don't have that role. But other proteins in here may have that role, but not a membrane protein. So this one is half right, so therefore it's wrong. So B, cell adhesion, that's right. That's basically sticking, right? And translation, again, no. Translation, proteins inside the cell will do that, not proteins on the membrane. Proteins inside the cell. So what about C? Cell-to-cell communication and protein pumps. That sounds right. Cell-to-cell communication, like we know, and protein pumps, like these little membranes that pump things in and out, hence the name protein pumps. So that's true. It's probably going to be C. So why is D incorrect? Passive transport, that's true, because this molecule here can allow molecules to passively or freely float through. Transport, you'll learn this in the next chapter about passive transport. Maybe you don't know it yet. And then glycolysis. Again, glycolysis uses proteins, but not membrane proteins. It would use proteins that are inside the cell, not on the membrane. So we know it's going to be C. So that's it for this video. I'm going to make a part 2, so just check that out as well.